In the spring of 2001, the dried-up Owens Lake was already one of the most toxic places in America, so the first valve in a shallow flooding system was opened on its floor. Its only purpose was to stop toxic dust. But within a year, scientist Mike Prather saw something remarkable. Thousands of birds were standing in the shallows. They were nesting on nearly every patch of dry ground. What had started as a fight against dust was about to become something else entirely. Before 1913, Owens Lake covered 108 square miles of water, up to 50 feet deep. That year, Los Angeles opened an aqueduct and began diverting the Owens River to the city. Within a few years, the lake had dried up completely. What remained was a white plain of salt and alkaline dust. Among the species that vanished along with the water were eared grebes, birds that each year perform one of the most astonishing physiological feats in the avian world on western salt lakes. After breeding, they more than double their body mass, while the chest muscles needed for flight atrophy to the point that the bird loses the ability to fly. This is the longest flightless period of any flying bird species in the world, up to 9 or 10 months a year. Without a saline lake with sufficient brine shrimp, this cycle is impossible. Approximately 99% of North America's eared grebe population depends on just 2 or 3 such lakes in California, Utah, and Oregon. Owens Lake was one of them, and it had been inaccessible for 80 years. The reason was simple: it no longer existed. In place of water stood a white plain of salt and alkaline dust containing cadmium, nickel, and arsenic. Every strong wind in the valley, and here the wind blows almost constantly, lifted this mixture in a wall that reduced visibility to a few meters. By the end of the 20th century, Owens Lake had become the single largest source of PM10 fine particulate pollution in the United States. In 2000, 62,377 tons of dust rose from its surface every year. For 80 years, nothing had existed here but salt and wind. In the 1980s, the Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District began legal pressure on the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, demanding that the dust storms from the lakebed be stopped. Negotiations lasted nearly 20 years. Only in 2000 did the Federal Environmental Protection Agency formally approve 3 control methods: shallow flooding, managed vegetation, and gravel coverage. The first real tests of shallow flooding used an underground bubbler system. The principle was simple: a thin layer of water spread across the lake floor prevents the salty dust from rising into the air. LADWP built one of the world's largest networks of computer-controlled valves, pipes, outlets, and sprinkler systems distributed across the entire historic lake surface. Today, shallow flooding remains the primary method and covers approximately 30 square miles, or about 60% of all control measures. Engineers tested cheaper alternatives in parallel. Tillage creates a surface relief of ridges and furrows oriented predominantly east to west to deflect winds that blow mostly from the north and south. Where the terrain allowed, furrows were laid in a zigzag pattern to catch wind from any direction. If the surface loses its required roughness, shallow flooding automatically kicks in as a backup method. The most expensive solution turned out to be gravel coverage. A 4-inch layer of gravel is laid on top of industrial geotextile fabric, a method requiring not a single drop of water. But laying gravel across 1 square mile costs up to $30 million. Heavy machinery regularly sinks into the unstable lakebed soil, and most importantly, this method creates no habitat for birds or any other wildlife. Engineers also tested a moat and row technique, but it never received full approval. None of these methods were designed for birds. At first, no one was thinking about birds, says Prather. But the shallow cells, less than a meter deep, built purely to control dust, accidentally recreated an environment that had naturally existed here decades earlier. On a November day, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power opened the sluice gates for the first time and flooded the first 10 square miles of the dry lake floor with a layer of water. Algae and primitive archaea began to multiply. Brine shrimp eggs and fly larvae hatched. Prather watched it personally. The following spring, he was astonished to see American avocets nesting on virtually every flat surface nearby, including the roads. In other words, the lake was infected with life, he says. Someone came here, poured thousands of acre-feet of water in, and if you stir, you get an instant lake. The pollution control officer overseeing the restoration work on the lake described it even more directly. Here, you just add water and everything comes back. Plants, shrimp, insects, birds, lizards. We even had a bear come out onto the lake, and pronghorn came out too. This became the proof of concept that a decade later would change thinking about how to proceed. It all started with a routine count that no one considered important. In 1985, a small corner of Owens Lake happened to fall within the radius of the annual Christmas bird count. The result stunned the team. Shorebirds and other migrants flying south were stopping over at the chain of small wetlands on the edge of the lake. It was as if the lake refused to die, he says, still struck by the memory. This discovery didn't remain a private observation. During that same period, Prather and other Audubon members learned that the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power was planning to seal several artesian wells on the historic shoreline of the lake. Armed with the count data, they approached the California Department of Fish and Game, and the wells remained open. A quiet but pivotal first victory. It gave Prather the most important thing, grounds to keep going. While Prather spent years persuading everyone willing to listen, an entirely different battle was underway in parallel, and it was that battle which in 1998 forced LADWPP to sign a dust control agreement for Owens Lake. In 2001, shallow flooding began. That same year, the lake received status as an internationally important bird area, recognition of its growing value for shorebirds and other waterbirds. But Prather himself remained largely a lone voice until 2006. It was just Mike jumping around out there by himself, says Andrea Jones, director of the Important Bird Areas program at Audubon, California. That year, he arrived at her office with 3 thick binders, articles, photographs, count data, testimony from public hearings. I gave it to her with both barrels, he says with a laugh. Jones remembers it differently. He attacked me with those huge binders. That same day, Audubon, California allocated staff and resources to Owens Lake. The one-person campaign became organized work. From that moment, the process gained structure. Regular surveys across the entire dust control project area began in 2007. On April 19, 2008, the Eastern Sierra Audubon Society, Audubon, California, and the Owens Valley Committee conducted the first comprehensive lake-wide survey. 112 species and 45,650 birds, the highest officially recorded count at that point. Among them, 13,873 California gulls, 9,218 American avocets, 1,767 eared grebes, and 13,826 sandpipers. The surveys became an annual tradition, Big Day, in spring and fall, jointly led from that point by Prather and LADWPP Water Resource Specialist Debbie House. Among those birds were 1,767 eared grebes, each of whom at the time of the count was potentially already in a period of temporary flightlessness, completely dependent on how much brine shrimp the shallow water had produced that season. The 2012 count recorded the highest shorebird numbers since regular surveys began in 2007. It seemed like the record had been set for a long time. It held for 1 year. On April 23, 2013, the results of the spring count astonished even those who had been following the lake for decades. 115,000 birds in a single day, among them 64,500 shorebirds of 20 species, a new record, beating the previous year's 75,000. LADWPP biologist Debbie House described it simply. Our highest single-day total was 115,000 birds in 2013. It's amazing. Just like the old days, a lake considered dead for 80 years had received more birds in a single spring day than the living population of some American cities. Today, shallow flooding and the other methods together cover 48.6 square miles of formally approved control territory. And the dust that rose from the lake's surface in 2000, at a rate of 62,377 tons per year, had by 2023 fallen to 355 tons, a reduction of 99.4%. The lake that was once the dirtiest air source in the country is now almost completely controlled. The snowy plover habitat area, which stood at 16,161 acres in 1997, was set under the 2008 plan to grow to approximately 46,932 acres, nearly tripling in less than a decade. The total number of species now recorded at the lake exceeds 241. The project cost over $1 billion, money Los Angeles spent not out of commitment to nature restoration but because a court left no choice. The world's largest dust control program became, as a byproduct, one of the largest wetland restorations in North America. The birds, for their part, returned the favor in their own way. Once federally protected species took up residence here, the project could no longer simply disappear or dry up again. The presence of these birds itself became the reason to keep water in place. What began as a forced measure against dust became something that living populations now depend on, and walking away from it is not as simple as walking away from the water in 1913. The survey data itself became a management tool rather than statistics for a report. The results of the annual Big Day surveys are used to refine the Owens Lake habitat suitability model. Where birds concentrate most densely, engineers learn which exact combination of depth, salinity, and shallow water area is worth replicating in other parts of the lake. In effect, the birds themselves tell the department where an engineering solution is working and where it isn't, and this determines where water is directed in following seasons. A lake that for decades was a symbol of toxic contamination has become a tourist magnet. An annual bird festival combines watching migration through the Mojave Desert with the history of westerns filmed in the Alabama hills and the ancient tribal heritage of the Owens Valley. The festival draws around 150 participants, half of whom come from a distance, including visitors from Oregon, Washington, and Canada. Among the event's partners is LADWP itself, along with Inyo County, Eastern Sierra Audubon, California, and several other organizations that 30 years ago were mostly suing each other over dust and water. Before each festival, 207 students from Lone Pine Middle School go on field trips to watch birds right beside their town. For children whose great-grandparents knew the lake only as already dead, this is the first generation growing up with a living Owens Lake as part of the ordinary landscape rather than a story about catastrophe. LADWP itself, the agency that effectively killed the lake 70 years ago, now speaks about it officially in the language of brand identity rather than regulatory obligation alone. The department's senior assistant general manager for water operations called the festival partnership a way to showcase the diligent work and care the department's staff puts into protecting habitat on the lakebed every day, and to increase visitation to this uniquely beautiful location in the Owens Valley. For a valley that for a century had seen the lake as a wound from the water crisis of 1913, this is a fundamental shift. The same lake floor that was once considered the region's greatest environmental catastrophe now appears in the water department's official promotional materials as a tourist attraction. The lake has not only stopped being a source of shame, it has become the point around which former courtroom opponents now organize joint public events. Today, Owens Lake is in a transitional state that engineers themselves call hybrid. Some areas previously maintained by shallow flooding are gradually being converted to tillage and managed vegetation, methods that use 3 times less water but give less predictable results for wildlife. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and independent researchers are testing new approaches: chemical soil stabilizers, sand barriers, even a joint project with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory combining dust control with solar panels installed directly on the surface of the former lake bed. None of these solutions yet guarantees that birds will remain in the same numbers. Every square mile converted from water to a dry method for the sake of water savings is potentially lost shallows for avocets and shorebirds that fly here each spring from thousands of miles away, from Argentina or the Arctic tundra. In the spring, when dawn is still gray and a sliver of moon disappears behind the granite peaks of the Sierra Nevada, a flock of American avocets bends their thin curved bills to the water on one of the Owens Lake shallows, searching for insects. A few steps away stands Mike Prather's granddaughter, 2-year-old Kestrel. She holds a pair of binoculars too large for her and counts shorebirds, as many as she can, up to 10. The third generation of his family is standing on the floor of a lake that was supposed to be dead. Whether this shallow water will still be here in 10 years, no one knows. Not LADWP, not the Air Quality Control District, not Prather himself. Owens Lake came back to life not according to nature's plan, but through an accidental decision by engineers fighting dust, not fighting for birds. It could just as quietly change again when engineers find a way to control that same dust without a single drop of water. For now, it is not dead. It is simply waiting for someone to keep counting.